Father calls me. Thank you very much for Gordon for your thought-provoking paper and the panelists. What I'm going to do is also to throw the ball to ourselves as I'm going to make a comment. In 2015, by God's grace, I had a chance of interacting with, the DECO, the South African Foreign Affairs Department. And they told me, us in that group, that South Africa realized that they were beaten by China in Southern Africa. JZ and his team has to go to China, not on state visit, but to go and understand why they are being beaten by China. That is strategic. When they arrived there, they were told that, you know what, China is moving with a briefcase of cash. If you look at all our countries, the entry of South Africa is through the head of states going downwards. That's why I found that Fizit can also be sold by Chinese. And come to South Africa, then they say that there can no way we can facilitate industrialization through our banks because of the constitution and this and that and that. Now in 2013, I was a SADC secretariat, and the deputy executive secretary then from Mozambique asked me to develop a strategy of how to engage China. But that paper could not see the light of the day because member states, maybe for some reason, they throw it away. The idea was that as long as we engage in China as single entities, there's no way we are going to. And what is lacking us, we don't have a strategy. And as civil society, we are not even pushing for that strategy to come on board. In 2021, I was in Harare and as a board member of Aphrodite in the meeting that was organized by Aphrodite and Zimcode. The Chinese embassy was sitting next to me. He was bombarded by several questions from members of parliament from ZANU-PF and other countries that were there. And his response was, please don't bite the hand that feeds you. What can I do as an ambassador if an official from government come and with 3 projects say, please, this is urgent? One of them is the airport. And it was not, because people were saying that this is not transparent and all that. Why? There's no strategy on us. So it's a challenge that we have as we are now unraveling this discourse, getting deeper. What strategy are we using? Do our governments have the strategy of engaging whether with Russia, with China, or with the BRICS? So that is the challenge that we are going to face. Mind you, are talking of human rights. In China, there are no human rights. Do we have NGOs that you can relate with in China? Nothing. So this is the challenge that we have, that I pose to this. I've got also a slide for those that want to take in China a strategy. When you're looking at the bottle, we can't use only 2 eyes to look in a bottle. It's not strategic, but you can use 1 eye. China is using 1 eye. Our leaders and ourselves in the continent are using 2 eyes. That's why we are missing it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Issues around lack of strategy on our part and using 1 eye would probably help. Yes, there was also a hand on that table. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share with you my few remarks. I want to pick from the thread that was laid bare yesterday by Opa and build on the contribution made by Mr. Bomba. I appreciate the recognition we're making on the issue of the crisis as it is unfolding in the world. And I like the comment by Bomba when he said that when we deal with a crisis of this nature, we need to radicalize our understanding of the situation and step out of the status quo-oriented discourses. So the crisis we are going through at the moment as people of Africa requires that we revisit the issue of debt, not from the point of view of managing it, but raising questions as to what is public debt, what is its history, what is its anatomy. Can we connect it with the financialization of the economies of the world? Can we connect it with the power structures, geopolitical power structures in the world? We know very clearly that we have a very good example in Singapore. Singapore did not develop through debt. It used national social security within its own tax raising measures to finance its development. And we have very many examples. Can we not ask ourselves whether or not we can look for other ways other than engage in debt relationships with the North? We know that debt historically has a lot to do with fictitious capital. And there are many examples where debt has been avoided and people have developed without using debt. So instead of waiting for debt to be a problem and then analyze and engage in analyzing how we should deal with it, can we not step out of the Davos process? Because Davos, or the road from Davos, leads nowhere. Can we not sit down and question ourselves whether we can put debt on the table and understand what it is and see where we can avoid it, so that we are not forced to sit down to discuss the repercussions of a problem that we could easily avoid? So I think we should be bold enough to walk out of the present paradigm of thinking and raise questions as to whether we can do without debt or not, rather than always create a problem for ourselves in poor relationship with the North, and then spend years on end discussing how this problem appears and analyze it left and right without questioning ourselves, can we not do without this problem? So I appreciate very much the sentiments expressed by Mr. Bomba that we really need to think out of the box, and we shouldn't be shy to radicalize our understanding of the situation as it is. Neoliberalism as a platform, as a framework of addressing our issues and problems in Africa will never yield anything. So we must discard anything that makes neoliberal agenda or neoliberal conditions be the basis of our understanding of our issues and problems. So I think our research as academics, as activists, must really take us out of the road that we know leads nowhere, and begin to radicalize our understanding of our situation and begin to ask very, very basic questions as to whether we need debt or not, and not necessarily assume that debt is a necessary condition, is a necessary thing which must happen, and if it has happened, we have to do 1, 2, 3 things and try to turn it around and find out how we can deal with it. I think that's the little comment I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, Doc. I hope our panelists are taking note of the issues. The road to Davos, where is it leading us? Just one of the things that he has said. Yes, please go ahead, sir.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I'd like to thank Gordon for his brilliant work, and also the contribution by the panelists. I was getting a sense that somehow, from the panelists, that somehow we are losing our understanding of why is Africa poor? Okay. So yes, I agree with Prof that yes, we're spending so much time on internal aspects of how we should manage it, but that's not where our problem is, for sure. But what is guiding us? That's the key point today. What is really guiding our discussions? What kind of development theory is guiding our understanding? Because the neoliberalism has actually destroyed, in a way, I hope people will agree, that it has destroyed our thinking. If you look at the universities, African universities, they are not teaching the essence of, we've been derailed actually. So we need a development theory that helps us to understand exactly where we are, and not focus so much on internal affairs, internal issues. And even when we are focusing on external issues, the only thing I can hear is, oh, we must dismantle the architecture, dismantle the, we're not guided by a thinking which says, can we begin to create a new architecture for ourselves, which might work better, but that might take time or a transitory process, but that's what we need to do. But with the understanding that eventually we have to not be the underdogs, okay? But, attacking some big thing is fine. But I think we are lured into that, We are lured into going to Washington, thinking that we can reform the IMF, and we're talking that same language, but not where the continent's solution lies, actually. I'm talking about taxes and income. Yesterday we tried to say that the reason why Africa is poor is that you can see this lack of linkages in our economy, structural problems of linkages in our economy. We import capital goods as if we can't make them. Neoliberalism actually tells you, and that's where we're stuck. Neoliberalism tells you, don't worry about making capital goods. Just import them because it's cheaper, it's better. We are also losing jobs and income because of that. Africa is losing jobs and income because we're not making the final products of lithium, of copper, and all this is our fundamental problem, you see? And we must understand that in the relationship, how Africa relates to the global thing. And don't forget history, please. I beg you. Because these structures from the past, which have been exploitative, are continuing today. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt about that. So we should at least understand why Africa is poor, at the least. So yeah, I hope that's what I'm saying makes sense.
Thank you so much. Yes, there was also another hand there. Yes, I've noted your hand. We'll come to you, then we'll get on this table. Okay. So 3 hands in a row. Let's start from there.
All right, thank you. My name is George Manda from Oxfam in Zambia. My question is directed to Chennai and Andrew. See, the conversation of Africa being rich in resources has been around for quite some time. And we have countries like Zambia and Chad, which are among the highest red metal producers, and yet these 2 countries are among the 5 who have applied to the G20 Common Framework to be helped with their debt. So my main question, the first one going to Andrew, what are some of the measures or initiatives do you think that African countries should put in place just so they can benefit from their resources? Then to Chennai, do you think we need a base mineral royalty tax rate for African countries just so these countries can benefit from their own resources? Thank you.
Thank you so much. 2 questions there. Initiatives that have to be put in place, but also the middle rate in as far as issues of taxation are concerned. So I hope our panelists, you have taken note. We'll get back to you after the 2 questions. I recognize the 2 hands at the back and also on this particular table. Yeah, we can also get you after the 2 hands. Yes, over to you.
All right, thank you. Mukasiris Banda is my name, the coordinator of the Stop the Bleeding campaign. So I love reggae music. Bob Marley has a song, Red Race, and he cautions, in the abundance of water, the fool is thirsty. But now I want to tell you my personal story, so that you can relate to the conversation that we are having here. I come from a country that is rich in terms of platinum. The platinum is being mined, we don't use it, it's exported, it's refined, and the purpose of platinum is a group of metals. Of interest there is platinum, palladium, and rhodium that are used as autocatalytic converters to reduce the emission in your diesel and petrol engines. So when I got some bit of money trying to upgrade my life, I imported a car from Japan. So I took it for service. They told me that, man, there is some converter there in your exhaust, and it only does not function well for cars that are in hot regions, but it's meant for cold environments. So we will gladly help you to remove that part which is not necessary for free. I was excited that these guys are so generous. I'm here for a service and they're helping me. And they removed that part. And then later on I learned it's platinum which is being recovered. So what is my point when it comes to resource governance? In law, there is the doctrine called the usufruct. Africans own our minerals insofar as they remain underground. But once they are extracted, we have lost control. Why don't we now, in a secular economy, rent our minerals? You have got the right to use, to enjoy, don't destroy, because we know recyclables are now playing a bigger part of the control of the minerals. I wanted to bring that. But as I conclude, I want to bring the discussion to focus on assets. Because when you talk about development, you can't do so without looking at your asset register. If you look at debt, you are looking at the other side of the balance sheet. And you can easily get distracted to focus on what you owe than what you have. So number one, we talk about natural resources for Africa. But simply a definition of asset tells you it is a resource that you control and you are expecting the probability of economic benefits to flow are very high. But you go to most communities where resources are extracted, they are clear that we do not control and we don't have any probability. They think about it as a possibility. They can't tell the likelihood in which in which the economic and fiscal benefits are likely to flow. But also understand the human capital that we have. When we spend so much using our scarce public resources, investing in doctors, in teachers, and there comes your UK, there comes your Canada, there comes your West, they offer them. They scoop those resources without investing in them, and then we are told that focus on what is it called? Remittances, without any compensation. Again, look at the relational capital. If you talk about your goodwill, Ukraine is a non-fact, is highly corrupt. But the reason why the West continuously pour money into the Ukraine, it is because global-wise, they have a relational capital, they have a goodwill, they can identify with them. But Africa, we are on our own. We need to be open and understand as we engage even in those in the multilateral framework that we are on our own. We do not have goodwill. We have negative goodwill when it comes to dealing with in terms of geopolitical issues. The fourth issue that I want to, which I think this has been dealt enough with Chennai, BRICS supported it, and this is the part of this caucus, is the financial capital. And it is the one that dominates all the conversations. And it sometimes may distract us also, may retard us from focusing on how to unlock value elsewhere. And then the last one, let's focus on the technology. And I am happy yesterday there was a conversation of Ethiopia. For the past 2 years, they discovered how it is important to start growing wheat. While I was excited, I was also shocked. You know, Ethiopia is one country in Africa that I've been to, And from day one, I tried to wear their clothes, and I'm still amazed now because they have traditional food. They have traditional clothes. So you wanted them to teach injera and then start to grow it. If it's not indigenous and you have got things that you have a competitive advantage, learn to cherish what you have. You are going to buy seeds. Seeds are going to be expensive. You are going to buy fertilizer, technologies that are required. So sometimes nothing is what it seems if you want to dig deep. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Nothing is what it seems. Two last comments, and I see 3 hands. We are running out of time, but quickly, let's just take the 3 hands. I have also recognized that hand. These are the last ones. Then we'll give the panelists an opportunity to make their concluding remarks. So let's start from this table. Then we'll get to the table there, and we finish with the table there. So,
thank you, moderator. My name is Atmabaze Patrick from Uganda Debt Network. I want to thank Dr. Moyo for a nice presentation. Thank you, and also the panelists. Particularly, I liked the question of confronting the past B as a block, which is not happening now, especially going to China and so forth. But Dr. Moyo, I thought when he talked about resource-based loans, you drive a bit on the hidden debt through the PPPs. I think this is also something we need to look at in our research. We have seen some of the donors or creditors, they come, for example, I'm from Uganda, as I said. China has built for us a stadium about 2 decades ago. And what they do is they pay their own companies and they deliver the product. But what happens is that product is not owned by the citizens. And as we're talking now, actually, the stadium has never been used. I've seen the same UK aid doing that, delivering schools, and we seem to see a problem. So how do we, work on this issue? We see it as a growing trend, a new form of debt. So I would want Dr. Moyo to say something about that. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll give Dr. Moyo an opportunity also to respond to that particular observation. You had raised a hand, then we'll finish with our dear lady here. Thank you so much. We could have done injustice gender-wise if you could not have spoken. So let's recognize our dear ladies too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Tafazwa Mplanga, Monitoring and Evaluation Intern for Aphrodite. I have a question. Chennai mentioned something to do about domestic resource mobilization as a serious challenge we are facing as Africans. So I would like to understand more on which strategies are you employing to mobilize domestic resources, and also which strategies are you employing to mobilize resources to cover funding gaps in infrastructure and health? And also the last question I have is, how are you dealing with informal sectors that are avoiding taxes? Maybe besides giving them penalties, how are you dealing with them? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Those 2 questions have been taken note of. Let's finish with that table over there.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Sophie Nampo Njuba is my name. I work with Oxfam in Uganda. You asked a question, where are African countries missing it when it comes to revenue mobilization, raising sufficient resources? And I think we're partly shying away from some of the things we already know. The previous speaker talked about informality. We have high levels of informality. And some of them are tactfully for people because they've learned ways of avoiding it. And partly because some say, when I pay my taxes, I don't get back what is due to me. And so they decide to work informally because they've understood the system and know how to be informal. But also our governments, I think, are taking advantage of what is easy to collect and leaving out what is difficult, things around administration. We have structures that go as far as a village level, if I'm to use the example of Uganda, where we have local councils. But we are ignoring them when it comes to the key areas that we need to work around collecting revenue. That local councillor or that chief or chairman of an area will know who owns what shop and how well the shop works or doesn't work, how good a business is and how good it isn't. And they can be able to facilitate the process of raising this revenue. They are able to say, this one is working well, that one is not working well, but we've ignored them. And we also have the big fish who know how to avoid paying taxes, but also because they know someone else, they'll make a call and they'll be excused. These are all gaps where we've failed to find solutions. And I'm not saying I have a solution, I don't, I'm just mentioning the problem, but we fail to find solutions to these problems, and we look for easier ways of getting revenue that are not easy in the long run. They're challenging to us in the long run. We're talking about debt and we are seeing problems, but then we've left out the small bits that are a bit challenging, but they would bring us more benefit if we found ways of handling them. So for where we are missing it is those informalities, the management, the administration, that if we tactfully look into ways of managing them, we might reap more in terms of increasing our revenue base, but also in terms of our independence and seeing how solutions of us slowly reducing the burden that we are putting on ourselves in terms of debt. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Managing informalities and using local structures as part of domestic resource mobilization. Let me now turn to our panelists. I have heard a couple of speakers specifically addressing their questions to Mr. Kumbatira, but also to Chennai. I hope you got the questions that have been posed. There was an issue of middle rate that has been asked, and domestic resource mobilization strategies that can be employed to work, and informal sectors avoiding taxation and all that, but also initiatives that can be put in place to address some of the issues that have been tackled here. So I want to start with Chennai. I know you have a couple of questions. Let's start with you. Then we'll get to Mr. Kumbatira. And finally, I'll ask Mr. Bomba if you have any concluding shots that you would also want to raise. And very last but not least, I'll get to Doc just to respond to the issue that came from this particular table. Then we'll end on that particular note. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you for all of the questions that came to us as panelists. So I'll pick the ones I think that were sort of pointed towards me. So I think overarchingly, when we talk about taxation, when we talk about domestic resource mobilization, it's a question about how best can we harness the resources that we have as a continent to work best for us, right? And so helping us answer that question is one of the ways for us to, in a sense, then avoid the larger debt question, right, which was raised earlier. Because there are instances of countries that were able to use the resources that they had domestically to fund their own development, right? And we haven't yet mastered that, partly due to our own internal issues. And so the informal sector issues, one that I mentioned, where we have certain participants that are evading or avoiding. Some of it is due to sort of administrative issues when it comes to our revenue authorities. Some of it is due to legislation that isn't strong enough. But another part of that, which I think is important and speaks to the theme of this conference, is the ecosystem within which we exist. So there are absolutely strides and steps that we need to take domestically to strengthen our taxation systems, right? The taxation system, one, but also much more fundamental issues, right? So the question that Mukasiri raised around value addition, right? So that we are generating a lot of the value within our own countries. So that needs to be done. But as I mentioned earlier, that's part of the conversation. The other part of the conversation is a need to question and look at the international tax system, the global tax system, that in a sense is made in a way that isn't suitable for us, for African countries. And to some extent cuts us at our knees when we do try to put in place measures to help us raise resources domestically. So it is a two-pronged approach. Now, one of the ways that we are going to start addressing this issue of the global tax system, right? And when I mention the global tax system, to give a specific example, we may put in place, for example, various ways to, put in place legislation, etc., right? But at the end of the day, if a corporate is funneling resources out of the country, it's heading to another country, and essentially our global taxation system allows for that, right? And so we need to address that. But in order to help us look at that, we need to come together, and a point was made earlier, to tackle this not as individual countries, but essentially as a continent. I think a point was made earlier about how, for example, we can start to look at some of the global dynamics that are at play that are in a sense coming against African countries. These are issues that we can't tackle as individual countries. And so we need to essentially develop common African positions where we are agreeing together ways in which we are going to push back against many of these systems that are essentially not working in our favor. So I think by and large, there are measures that we can take domestically, right? And so issues around mineral royalty rates, informality, etc. But at the end of the day, we need to take a holistic approach towards addressing these issues. We need to take a holistic approach towards targeting the global issues that are essentially coming against us, but also looking at how as African countries we're able to band together to push against these issues.
Many thanks, Shanai. Andrew, do you want to say something?
Yes, thank you very much. The AFCOD 3 in Dakar is calling us to look at the 4 R's. Rethink, reorganize, reimagine. Yes, I thought that we also need to have a look at our internal systems at country level. There are serious weaknesses in the country that need attention too. You will find that it's not uncommon that in our countries, people that should be driving things in the country, you find that those that should not be anywhere near a government office are the ones that are inside government offices doing these things. And yet, so many are out there, but because of the political systems, they are nowhere allowed to participate and assist in the development agenda of the various countries. People are put into positions for political affiliations, not necessarily for their capacities to be able to manage things. These things are derailing Africa to a level where we fail to do deals that would be beneficial to our countries. There are so many stories. I don't think this is new to Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe. If you are not politically aligned, you cannot participate. These things need relook, need a rethink, because they are derailing our ability to be able to confront that which needs to be confronted. In this whole conference, from yesterday to today, I haven't heard at least the C word, the corruption that is so endemic in our systems, that is derailing progress, that is simply appalling, perpetuated by the political elite and everyone else. We haven't mentioned it, and yet we heard that this is a debt conference. Opa yesterday was talking about trade, but corruption is also an index that is part of this, because it is also affecting our performance as a nation. So we are failing to develop because of corruption. There's so much corruption. We need to confront this as we rethink and reorganize. If you are not aligned to a political party, is there a way you still have room? When you go for interviews, you can still be picked for a job. There are so many cases where important jobs are just being given to people that have no capacity to deal with those jobs, and they make mistakes. Some mistakes, so many parastatals around the region have ended up with debt that government must write off because of poor management. In South Africa, it's common. In our countries, these things matter. And we need to talk about them. So the question that came to me, what can we do to reposition internal systems? We really need to look at these things. How many universities do we have that are looking at geology, looking at minerals, how to negotiate these things? Where do we go? Where are we sending our kids? And in Africa, we are also short-term in our approach. Whether democracy is contributing to this, we don't seem to have a long-term view of our agenda. Everything seems to be short-term. And because of that, we're failing to develop. And it's creating a challenge. So many things, as we look at the 4 R's, Briggs mentioned that we cannot approach this, we cannot approach a crisis as a problem. Ours is a crisis, and therefore we need to step out and really look at it very, very carefully. So the 4 R's are really critical. I think inwardly at the different country levels, let's also focus and influence, demand from the political elites the system that we are using, which is also derailing progress in our various countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Maybe that's another global storm that we needed to add, Doc. Governance, as manifested in issues around corruption. Yes, Briggs, do you want to add something?
No, just a few words to touch on some of the questions that were coming in and just wrap it up. And I'd like to bring the issue of Africa as a rule maker. I think this is critical. We are currently a rule taker. We are subject to rules that were made by others to advantage themselves. So I think we need to look at that very seriously. If you listen carefully to our conversation on the issue of illicit financial flows that Chennai brought in, it's taxation, 65% or so, corruption, and criminal activities. At the UN level, you have already existing framework conventions to deal with crime, organized crime. There's a framework convention that deals with corruption, but there is nothing that is there that is dealing with taxation. So when you're talking about making new rules now, there's a big advocates thrust that's pushing for a UN model tax convention so that you complete the picture. If we are saying illicit financial flows is a result of these 3 areas, it's quite mysterious and conspicuous that no one wants to invest as much effort in dealing with taxation, especially international tax cooperation at the level of the UN. So this is a big struggle, this is a big fight for the continent. Someone mentioned the inclusive framework that the OECD, G20 is pushing. It's simply to say that other actors within the international community understand that rulemaking is important, and they're advancing that, and then they'll invite us or they'll impose those rules at the end of the day. So we need to be engaged in this rulemaking fight, especially within a much more democratic framework such as the UN. So that's the first point. The second point is on financialization. I don't know if we fully grasp the fact that finance rules the world, and just how destabilizing this unbridled financialization is, not even just to us as developing countries, but even some of the developed countries themselves. There's so much wealth that is being lost from the continent. So if you come to the debt, for example, the biggest crisis that Africa is facing with regards to debt right now is actually Eurobonds. And Eurobonds are an essential or a definitive feature of the financialization era of capitalism. Because Eurobonds are an example of what would be called, innovation, financial innovation. And it's a bearer bond, which means that whoever is holding that certificate is the person that you owe. So there are very much less restrictions and controls around Eurobonds than what existed when you were dealing with bilateral debt. That's why this current debt crisis is a lot more difficult to resolve than the previous debt crisis that we were able to resolve when there was a lot more control and restrictions on finance capital. So when you get to this point of completely unrestricted finance capital and unlicensed, unmanaged, unregulated financial products, the net effect is that every day citizens are losing money. Just look at what's happening online. I think in Zimbabwe, people had something called e-creator. Or people who just roam the streets and they tell you, give us your money, we'll give you a wallet with technology. They'll give you an online wallet. And then at the end of the day, those things collapse in a month, in 2 months. It's all examples of just how wealth is being lost from the continent through this financial engineering. So we really need to challenge that whole idea of financialization. And I think we need to spend more time around financialization literacy so that we really know what we are up against. Thank you.
So much. Ladies and gentlemen, let's finish with a comment or two from Doc on account of the issue that was raised here, and that will mark the end of our session. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. My parting word is, and thank you for the question, because I don't think I was going to be given the platform. I just want to make 3 quick parting words. The first one is a frustration. My frustration is on the word reform. We have been talking about reform, and saying Africa should reform. I think that's problematic for me, but I'm not saying it's problematic for all of us. It's something for debate. In 2010, sir, African countries, global South countries, global Africa as a whole, we were pushing for the reform of the international financial institutions. And the World Bank in 2010 accepted the reforms. The reform, one reform at least that I want to talk about, which is the voting powers. The voting powers, African countries and the global South countries wanted their voting powers to be raised. That was a reform. In 2010, they were raised. It was China's voting powers. It was India. It was Russia. African countries' voting powers were actually reduced. Nigeria reduced, South Africa reduced under the banner of reforms. So we must be careful when we are talking about reforms. Yes, the idea of de-linking that was said yesterday makes more sense to me than reform. Revisionism is not making sense to me. De-linking makes sense to me because we are coming with something that is relevant, appropriate to your context. The second point that I want to make is that of debt being good. I heard yesterday, I think there was the argument yesterday was debt is good, debt is good. And I think that's what even textbooks will say, debt is good, debt is good. I am worried myself. I have not seen debt being good to the public. I have seen debt being good to profit, to businesses, but not to public. So I have a problem with debt as said to be good as a generic term, because I don't see anywhere in Africa where debt has been really good. It can appear to be good when you set up a stadium there, but down the lane, you know you are going to pay back, perhaps without the necessary resources, necessary production to service it. That's my second point. I have a frustration on the ringing tone that says debt is good. Finally, the question from my brother. I totally agree with you. There are issues when it comes to triple Ps. Triple Ps, I mean, somebody was telling me, was it the day before yesterday, saying in Kenya, when you are, is it Kenya? If I get it wrong from my friends from Kenyans, please, you can help me. You would find some non-foreigners, either in the trains in Ethiopia or somewhere around the roads, collecting money because of the triple Ps, because they were involved in triple Ps. They are collecting money, and they are, I mean, just collecting money. They can't even trust us to collect the money so that we can pay back to them. So the issues of innovative financing mechanisms that you are raising, my brother, are problematic because they sound good. Triple Ps, your resource-backed loans, futurization of future flows, sovereign wealth funds, they are all sound good, but down the lane, if we don't interact very well with our own circumstances, we will pay back badly. Thank you.
Many thanks, Doc. Thank you so much for a wonderful and insightful conversations that we've had. I hope we will not end here, but as we get out of the room, we will continue the conversations from where we have stopped. Let's give another round of applause to our panelists and to our lead speaker for the job well done. Let's end here.